So uncertainty is a funny kind of a thing, and it's not what we think it is. We see it as being something undesirable, as a failure of our ability to orientate ourselves correctly, our failure to get correct information, etc., etc. So we see it in those terms. When really it would be better to say that uncertainty is when we're not trapped in a rigid way of looking at the world, or we could say just simply that uncertainty means not being trapped or being free or being open to lots of different possibilities. If you're open to lots of possibilities, that's uncertainty. If you've only got the one possibility, there's no uncertainty in that. So we could say, in a rough and ready kind of a way, that going along with the supposition that there is such a thing as therapy, which is a supposition, to be careful about it and not take anything for granted, so we're not making assumptions. But suppose we say that there is such a thing as therapy. Maybe there isn't, but supposing that we say there is, then on this basis we could say that what's helpful is to increase our uncertainty about the world. Which is interesting because obviously that outrules any intellectual approach, because all rational approaches, all intellectual approaches increase our certainty. They have to, because the rational intellect only deals in certainties. It can't have anything to do with uncertainty. It can't have any truck with it, any business with it at all. Because everything about our rational thinking always comes packaged in categories. And the whole thing about a category is it's a little way of manufacturing certainty. Our mental categories are our engines for manufacturing certainty. And we have to have engines to manufacture it because it isn't there naturally. So we manufacture it by this very simple precedent of having a category which we assume to be valid. We assume to have some legitimate relationship with the world. We do have to assume that because there's no way we can actually ever prove that or demonstrate it. And then we do a simple trick. We just ask questions on the basis of all of our categories. Is it fit with this category or does it not? And the only two possible answers, very obviously, is yes, it does fit with this category. No, it doesn't. Both of those are totally certain. So straight away, by having a whole bunch of categories which we filter all of our incoming information through, we do this amazing thing and we generate certainty. We create a world of certainty out of our categories. Now, if we could see this, you would see very, very clearly that there is no such thing as certainty, except in as much as it is engineered or manufactured via this trick. You would see that really, really clearly. But we never look behind the scenes, which is surprising because this is very, very simple and easy to understand. It's dead simple. What could be simpler than understanding this? We never look behind the scenes, though. So we are only interested in processed information that comes out of our array of categories. Now, once it hits us post the categories, it's all neatly wrapped up. It's all based on certainty. It all is certainty. So that's our feed. It's the certainty. We never have any interest at all in what our feed looks like before it gets processed by these engines. And of course, once it has, that becomes the world for us. But because we don't examine what happens beforehand in this certainty producing process, as far as we're concerned, that the world is certain, and that's all we're interested in, and we proceed on that basis. So if there is such a thing as a rational therapy, and obviously there is lots of examples of rational therapy, it's got nothing to do with increasing our uncertainty about things. So in cognitive behavioral therapy, we're kind of maybe getting rid or questioning some of the more extreme categories, catastrophic categories, which is a bit hard to say if we're not paying attention, and say, no, it's not that category, it's a different category, and we're kind of hopping from one category to another. But the idea of going beyond our categories, it never occurs to us. So we might say, for example, to look at it slightly different, we might say, okay, I have all these ideas about myself, and so as a result of going through the CBT process, I can then say, no, I've examined the evidence, it's not reasonable for me to believe in these ideas about myself, so they're definitely not true. So that's certainty. We're using certainty to lever ourselves away from these ideas which are pain-producing or fear-producing. But certainty, we're using certainty in a non-rational approach that is based on relativizing all our concepts, all our categories. We wouldn't say, no, it's definitely not. Oh, it's definitely not. You're definitely not the worst person in the world. Because we can't say something like that. We don't know. It's a lie. It doesn't partake in reality. Or we can just say, well, it's uncertain, which doesn't make us very happy, really, because we want to be damn. We'd like to know for sure that I'd like to know for sure that I'm not the worst person in the world. But that's not really therapy, because it's not honest. It's just I'm selling myself something that a particular type of illusion, and backing it up by the rational mind, which can't really back it up because the rational mind isn't based on reality at all. It's based on our processed version of reality, which we don't admit to be, etc., etc. So that's a way of looking at how uncertainty comes into therapy, and it's not a rational way. There's no, even though I know I am trying to argue for uncertainty or to present the case of uncertainty, there is no way to argue it because all of our arguments are black and white, because all arguments come from the rational mind. So in practice, we don't argue it or try and prove it by logic or thinking about it. We observe it. We observe uncertainty. And when we do perceive the world directly without filtering it through this conceptual mediation business, it is uncertain. Kind of that's the beauty of it. Nothing can be proved. We love proving things. We love to have therapy that can be proved. We love to say things that can be proved, and that's all fine, apart from the fact that doesn't work in reality. So if we are at all interested in the real world, there's no proving anything. I can't prove a damn thing. There's no such thing as proof. Nobody can. No matter how unless we take a very, very kind of oversimplified case, and I say, okay, given the case of this oversimplified version of reality, which is another way of talking about a game, within the context of this game, I can say things for certain because I've made these assumptions, and if we follow through with these assumptions, I can say certain things. But it's always based on this kind of conditionality that if my assumptions are true, I can say certain things. So once we acknowledge that conditionality, we know that the certain things aren't certain because they're only true if the assumptions are true, and we can never prove that the assumptions are true, ever, ever, ever. So really, it's a game, and the certainty that we're talking about is only there if we assume a certain framework and operate within that framework and ignore anything that disagrees with the framework or doesn't fit with it. culturally we really have a hard time with uncertainty. I was looking, I think it was on YouTube or was it something like that yesterday, and there's a kind of a thing or talk, maybe it was even a TED talk, I don't know, something like that, about how to manage uncertainty. That is a typical Western kind of a thing, and looking at it superficially, we might think, most people would probably think, oh, that's good. How to manage uncertainty in your life or deal with uncertainty. But we can see that this is still the thinking mind in the background, so it's trying to get the upper hand. I mean, the idea of managing uncertainty is nonsensical in the extreme. If I can manage uncertainty, it isn't uncertain, it's just stuff that I've managed, and management is always putting things into certain terms. I have parameters that want it to be between this parameter and that parameter, and that's certainty for you. It's not all over the shop. I'm managing it, I'm imposing order on it. Order comes from the thinking mind. It's based on black and white categories. So we don't manage uncertainty. There's no if we could do that, it wouldn't be uncertainty at all, it'd be something else. There is no managing uncertainty, there's no controlling uncertainty, because uncertainty comes first, it's primary. As I've been saying over and over again, really, it's the source, it's where things come from. It's not something that we can do anything about or work with or deal with in any way. What we can do with it is just recognize that it is there and that it is primary. So once we understand this diametrically opposed approach, so on the one hand we've got the approach which we're all familiar with and which everyone sees as being a good idea, which is where we impose a framework and we get better at controlling as a way of working with mental health disorders. We're getting extra intellectual about it, we're thinking very clearly, we're trying to identify stuff and make it all very logical. So the rational mind's having a field day, it's doing its thing. It's doing its thing. And somehow that's supposed to help us. We could believe that it would help us if we believed that there is such a thing as certainty in the world. But if there isn't, and if our certain view of the world is a bluff, a kind of hypnosis we've put ourselves under, and if the fact that we have chosen to deny reality in this way is at the root of all of our mental distress, then clearly trying to be better at controlling and managing is just furthering the denial. So the denial is causing us problems, and that's inarguable. We all know that being in denial doesn't solve problems, it creates extra problems. That's something we all know. So by furthering the denial, and maybe kind of systematizing it a bit better and shoring it up with evidence, this word that is so beloved, doesn't mean a damn. There is no evidence. Really, because there is no evidence, because human beings are so complex that there is absolutely no way to logically analyze human beings or have theories about human beings. Like Noam Chomsky says, you can observe, but you can't theorize. You can theorize about much simpler things. For example, you can theorize about what happens if you've got three atoms interacting within a small area of space. Even that's hard. Even that attacks your brain. But it can be done. And you can get mathematics out of it and stuff, and that's called physics. But the idea that we can do that with human beings is not scientific, and no scientist would ever have anything to do with that idea. We just think we can extend this kind of label of science to cover everything, and that'll justify our what we say, basically. But one thing we have to be very clear about is there's no such thing as theories, there's no such thing as principles that can be elucidated, or laws, or constants that can be working out. All of that stuff, which we're familiar with in science, and which is great, it doesn't exist in psychology. And psychology isn't a science. And I guess everyone knows this in a way, just like kind of like the emperor's new clothes. Everyone knew the emperor had no clothes. It's just that no one says it. Someone you're afraid of being laughed at, really. But definitely the emperor, he's stark bollock naked. He really is. He hasn't got a stitch on. You might as well say it. So this has got nothing to do with science, because our understanding of science really is we think science makes the world more understandable and more certain for us. So we're using science to kind of nail everything down to increase our sense of ontological security. Actually, science doesn't do that, because we run into uncertainty, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, and this is irreducible uncertainty, irrevocable. And it's uncertainty, you can't bust your way through it. It's not meant to be busted through. It's a fundamental principle. Uncertainty is the fundamental principle. So I keep repeating. So then we come to the question, okay, if the thinking mind is no good, what the hell do we do? How do we proceed? How do we help ourselves? How do we work with mental health conditions if this most beloved of our tools is not fit for purpose? What the hell do we do? We're just sitting there like Aegis. We don't know how to control. We have no means of controlling. We have no means of systematically understanding what's going on either, because that's the real world. And it's all very well to have a fantasy in which you can do all these things, but which isn't the real world, because when you bring that kind of business into mental health, that is kind of like too ironic for words, really, that we should use this kind of fantasy approach to mental health. It's really, really ironic that instead of recognizing that it's our search for security where security doesn't exist that's caused our problem, we actually try to import extra security with made up pseudosciences. It's just utterly absurd. So there is an answer. It just doesn't involve trying to be in control, number one, or trying to know categorically what's going on via some sort of system, fitting everything into our ideas or theories. And so what is helpful is to get better at relating to radical uncertainty. And there's no way to do that, there's no method to do it, because if I give you a method to relate to radical uncertainty, the method, as I said before, is certainty. If you do X, Y will happen. We love that, that's certainty. Don't worry, do X, Y will happen. Just remember X, make sure you get X right, and then Y is definitely going to happen. That's certainty, because it's cause and effect. We know if we put the cause there in the right condition, we're going to get the result. So there's control, and there is our sense of security. And that's the one thing which we're trying to learn how to live without that. So obviously there can't be a method. Just forget about the method. Forget about a system. Like Bruce Lee said, there's no system. I can't teach you a system. There is no system. Systems are ludicrous oversimplifications of life. And if that is true for what Bruce Lee was talking about, martial arts, it's also true for psychotherapy, it's also true for psychology. But that we do have an innate capacity to relate to uncertainty. We all have it in us, we just don't use it. Why don't we use it? Because we're using the thinking mind instead, and its spurious made-up certainties to give us a false sense of security. Bad move, really. we can get by for a certain length of time, but when things start to come on top for us, when things start to crack up a bit for us, and we can't control, then we discover that if I can't control, I have no way of being in that situation, because as far as I'm concerned, if I can't control, or if I don't really know what's going on, that's an utter disaster, super disaster, and it's really bad. So I start thinking these thoughts, it's really bad, so I freak out, it's really bad. There's nothing I can do, so I have to freak out, because if I can't control, know what's going on, freak out. That's the only. But suppose we had developed this capacity, this kind of a muscle, to be okay about not knowing, which is Keats' negative capability to dwell in uncertainties. So just as Keats was saying, that isn't a way to be an artist unless you can dwell in uncertainties without irritably trying to nail them down and make them certain. Because creativity comes out of uncertainty. If you nail everything down, that's just a bunch of concrete crap, and it doesn't mean anything. It's boring and tedious, and it's not creative. So that uncertainty is the root of where creativity comes from. So that's why creative people are, by virtue of the fact that they are creative, kind of develop that muscle of being able to hang out in the uncertainty zone. But it's not just good for creativity, it's also good for living life. We're actually able to be in life as it is without rewriting it in our own heads and saying, this means this and that means that, and rewriting it in our own terms so as to feel secure about it, which is an abhorrent thing to do. We're never letting anything be what it is. We're never letting anyone else be what they are. We're regressing everything and reinterpreting it in the way we want to reinterpret it, which is, you could say that's just aggression, pure psychological aggression. And you could also say that it's fear, because aggression is what comes out of fear. Aggression is fear. It's our fear. We're afraid to let things be what they are because we don't know what they're going to are, and we're no good at being with stuff unless we know in advance what it's going to be, and it's going to be what we say it's going to be. The best thing in the world for us is to be able to identify an outcome and say I want this to happen, and then make it happen. We think that is the ultimate badge of something or other. You know what it's the ultimate badge of? Being a winner, being a goal setter, someone who has goals and achieves those goals. What a load of nonsense. I mean, what total, utter nonsense. That's just fear. Control is always fear. And it's boring. To live in a world of control is to live in an infinitely tedious, pointless, repetitive, useless world. There's nothing of interest in that at all. And there isn't whenever we're in denial, whenever we're in fear. That's the thing when we deny reality and we end up living in our own made-up world. That's the whole point, that is infinitely tedious and futile and pointless, and we are totally alienated from reality as a result. That's the price we pay for running away from reality. So to be able to control better, it doesn't mean a damn really, it just means it's an inverted value. You see it as a value, but actually it's not a good thing. It's a good thing in as much as it creates extra suffering and alienation and sterility for ourselves. It's another nail in the coffin. So it's good in that sense. If we invert the values to say that is a good thing, and to be a prisoner in our own mind is a good thing, or to live in a world that isn't real but we can't see isn't a real world, a very banal, repetitive world, if we say that's a good thing, then it is a good thing. Okay, thanks for watching.